He gives people electric shock.
Undergrads, Columbia undergrads, he will shock them in the brain scanner.
And they get paid like $12 an hour for this?
I hope they get a bit better compensated than the wine drinkers, because that'd only be fair.
Okay, so he says, come on in, kid, I'm going to shock you, but I'm going to then give you this magic...
This new, very powerful anesthetic, which will help ease your pain. It's actually a hand moisturizer. But what you find is that when you tell people it's a pain reliever, the prefrontal cortex, which is, for the most part, the center of rational thought, reaches down and reduces the activity in a brain area called the insula, which is important for registering bodily pain. So it literally kind of plays with the dials of your pain response. So even this
the smartest part of your brain says, well, if they put this cream on me, I can't be feeling so much pain.
Exactly.
So how smart is the smartest part of us if it's so stupid?
It can be pretty magical, it can be pretty powerful and Promethean, but it also comes with real computational limitations. So one of my favorite experiments in the book, which we talked about in Radiolab, was an experiment done by Baba Shiv at Stanford, and he had two groups of subjects. One group he gave a 2-digit number to remember to, the other group he gave a 7-digit number to remember to. He told these people this was a test.
To remember, period. He gave them he gave one group a 7 numbers to remember.
Yes.
Not to remember.
To remember.
Yes, to remember.
Yes.
And then he gave the other group 2. Yeah.
Left out a crucial word in that sentence.
You added one extra word.
So he gave them a 2-digit number to remember and a 7-digit number. And he told these subjects this was just a test of long-term memory, but he was lying. And then he marched them down the hall and said, okay, time for a snack. It's snack time. What he found, he gave them a choice between fruit salad and chocolate cake. And what he found was that the group given 7 digits to remember were almost twice as likely to choose chocolate cake as the group given 2 digits to remember to. And what he argues is that the extra cognitive load, the fact that these extra 5 numbers take up so much brain space, so tax the prefrontal cortex that you have left brain power left over to exert self-control and resist the chocolate cake.
You mean just because you have to remember 7 numbers, you're
7 as opposed to 2?
You become a little pipsqueak on top of and the elephant eats the cake.
Absolutely. The elephant just wants the cake. It wants the gooey, rich, decadent slice of chocolate cake.
Well, does that tell you then that the rational brain has the power of 7 bits of information and then becomes totally exhausted?
That's the classic study done by George Miller back in the 50s, which he called the magical number 7 plus or minus 2, which is that people can hold 7 digits plus or minus 2 in working memory. That's why phone numbers, social security numbers, all the important numbers we have to remember are 7 plus or minus 2. You get too far beyond that, and the average man or woman can no longer keep these numbers in working memory.
Okay, let's go the other direction. Instead of trying to be as smart as trying to ride the big elephant, let's just switch to the upper picture there. Let's try to, like Pooh Bear, think, and think some more. So let's go to, what's the name of the soprano in your book? I'll tell you the name of the soprano in your book. You can't remember the name of the soprano in your book?
Oh.
It's Renee Fleming.
Yes.
Tell me about Renee Fleming.
Renee Fleming.
Maybe she's not a soprano?
She's a soprano.
Okay.
She was a famous choker. She's one of the great opera singers in the world. And back in the late 80s, she got into the habit of thinking too much. So she'd get this interior monologue in her head saying, oh, you're not going to hit the high note, or be sure to open your mouth widely. So she became very self-conscious of these very minor movements that opera singers are supposed to perform automatically. And that's when she started to choke on stage. So the basic idea was that she was so worried about hitting the high note that she couldn't hit the high note anymore.
Which only made her to think harder about hitting
exactly.
the high note.
It becomes this downward spiral. It's the same process that happens to golfers on the 18th hole or Shaquille O'Neal at the free throw line.
Yeah, so 1999 British Open, what happens?
This is probably the classic case of choking. It's on YouTube. It's rather painful to watch. But John Van de Velde was in the lead at the British Open, and he had a 2-stroke lead. So he'd birdied this hole twice before that day, but now he'd never won a big tournament before, so he's very, very nervous. And he basically chokes massively. It takes him 7 strokes just to get to the green. So he loses the British Open right then and there. He's sent to a runoff, but at that point his confidence is so shattered that he can never recover.
So if you think you may be thinking wrong, but if you overthink, you're going to get into all kinds of trouble. In your book, you actually You described back pain. So back pain used to be just pain in your back. Then they could suddenly take pictures of every little thing in your back. So now you have a chance to think like Pooh Bear many thought.
Yeah.
Now what happens?
I think the diagnosis of back pain is a classic case of the dangers of too much information. For decades, doctors were forced to diagnose chronic back pain using x-rays, which give you a rather limited amount of information. You can see the spinal column, the vertebrae, but that's about it. Then MRIs come along in the late 80s, and for the first time, doctors can see all the spongy tissue around the spinal column. They can see the spinal disc and all the rest. So they're convinced this will allow them to solve the problem of back pain. So they started making all sorts of diagnoses about herniated disc causing back pain, disc degeneration leading to back pain. It leads to spinal fusion surgeries and lots of disc surgeries. It's a huge part of medical care, very, very expensive. And then a few years later, in the mid-90s, studies start to come out where doctors put people with no back pain in MRI machines and found that they also had herniated disc. They also showed disc degeneration. So this correlation that seemed so obvious at first glance completely disappeared. In fact, the latest guidelines from the AMA tell doctors not to give MRIs unless they think there may be cancer. That doctors make better decisions with much less information. That giving doctors too much information, letting them see too much, actually leads them to make erroneous conclusions about what's causing the back pain.
So this is kind of an interesting situation. On the one hand, if you think too much, if your rational brain is overdoing it, and your emotional brain is undersized, then you just freeze. On the other hand, if you think you're being smart, you might be going off doing completely the wrong thing.
Yeah, that both these brain systems, these two brain systems that Plato first identified to his credit, they both come with distinct set of advantages and disadvantages. That they're good in some situations and bad in others. And the key is really figuring out how to adjust your thought process to the task at hand, so you're thinking in the right way depending on the decision.